This season of Demon Slayer is coming to a close, and the final season of Attack on Titan is airing, so I thought I'd decide to mash these two series up. I don't want to waste your time, so let's get right into it. Now, before I even get started with this drawing, I'm gonna have to do some basic concepting. I want to incorporate elements of both shows, but there's only so much room to put stuff on a character before it starts to get a little bit too messy. Elements that really stuck out to me to include was the ODM gear, as well as some adaptation of the katanas used. Now, Tanjiro's cloak is pretty cool, and I do want to incorporate it. However, when I was trying to come up with ways to implement it, I really thought the only way I could do it was reducing it to some other feature in the clothing. One little annoying feature that isn't really going to pop up too much is the fact that Tanjiro's cloak is super saturated. Now, the reason this isn't going to pop up for me is because the final drawing I'm going to be making is going to be ink. And the reason why this creates a problem is the fact that Attack on Titan uses a lot of earth and pretty much desaturated tones. In contrast, Demon Slayer uses some really bright patterns. One thing I want to do, which is probably taking a little bit of creative liberty on my part, is I want to try and push the steampunk aesthetic a little bit further. One concern I have with doing this is that I might end up losing some of the grounding in Attack on Titan. You know, I could just be lazy and put him in a scout uniform and call it a day. However, I feel like that would turn out pretty tacky. Now, implementing the elements of the scout uniform after the time skip might actually be the move, because it's a lot more of a sleek design. And, you know, the downsides of doing this would be the loss of, you know, the iconic jacket. You know, that's such a huge part. But I think I'm probably going to end up doing that. I eventually landed on this. It's a nice middle ground, I found, and it does kind of push the steampunk aesthetic a little, but obviously the final design, I'm going to add some more details and try to simplify some of the less fleshed out aspects of this in the final drawing. However, at this point, I do actually have a pretty solid foundation for the final drawing. When I'm deciding on what to do, I have to weigh the trade-offs of pushing dynamic angles. Things generally become a little bit wonky and harder to draw the more dynamic the shot is. On the other hand, if I leave it in too neutral a pose, it becomes a little bit less visually interesting. I think what I'm going to end up doing is more of a neutral pose and end up using some graphical elements in the background such as smoke to really flesh it out and try and keep it a little bit more interesting for the viewer. I also have to consider how close I place Tanjiro himself. I could place him pretty far back in the drawing, however that would mean I would have less space to actually draw the character and flesh out the details as much as I would like, so I'll probably end up doing like a waist up shot. After a few thumbnails, I think I got the composition and the pose that will work. I actually find that thumbnails are always better than my final piece. They just seem to flow better, which, you know, it's surprising because you'd think the big one would be better with all the, you know, hatching and details you could add in, but when you're shrinking images down, you can really focus on just the composition. And, you know, go figure, you get a better final image. Now, we're actually going to move on to the actual piece of paper I'm going to be doing this on. I find that if I start off with any more detail than this, I end up getting tunnel vision and lose track of the image as a whole. Now, after I get everything else mapped out, I could go straight into adding details slowly across the page very in depth, or, you know, I could slowly add just minuscule details and eventually my whole image will come together. I'm gonna opt for working pretty intensely in one spot and then moving across the page because it's a little bit better for filming, you know. I definitely could have made my job a little bit easier here and just, you know, did a quick cut and not even show you guys the drawing, but I really wanted to get this all in a time lapse for you guys. Speaking of making things easier for myself, I could have simplified the ODM gear a little bit more than the actual show. It definitely would have saved time. However, you know, what I really want to make sure I get in this image is the Attack on Titan aesthetic, you know. And of course, the real reason is the fact that I hate myself. And, you know, I have some extra you know, I thought I had some extra time this week to get this drawing done because I'm not actually getting railed by my professors. I could have probably spent this time, you know, studying for midterms like a loser. But instead, I'd rather spend that time adding hatching and details into the drawing that probably won't even get noticed. One thing I've noticed is adding to the variety of artists whose work I consume and study from really does add some interesting elements to the art, as opposed to it just being worse versions of, like, you know, the few artists I look at. There's little bits of tips and tricks you can pick up from a variety of artists. You know, originally I pretty much only drew from a few artists, mainly in the anime or manga background because that's just what I consume the most, you know? You know, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I have a significantly large gap in terms of my inking and pencil art as opposed to just, you know, my overall art skills. Relatively speaking, I'm quite a bit better than anything else, and the reason I'm better at this is because, you know, I decided to, you know, focus a lot of my time on the two mediums. You know, this means I could improve pretty quickly as opposed to if I was stretching my time across multiple mediums. I got pretty quick improvement pretty fast, you know, I'd say roughly 6 months, 3 to 6 months, I got pretty decent at ink. I finally understood, hatching. Obviously, there's always more to learn. Well, the reason why I bring this up is the fact that I feel like it's best for people to, focus on, their niche, what they prefer to do the most. And then, from there, you want to expand outwards. You start with specialization in one area, and then eventually you can expand to more general, audience. So really what's important is picking out, what you like doing first of all, and what type of artwork is in demand. What artwork fills your needs. If you're really constrained for time, maybe hyperrealism isn't for you. However, if you're making art for like a pretty wealthy set of group, maybe you want to consider oil painting. As they might be more inclined to, purchase traditional art as opposed to digital because, it holds value. Me personally, because I'm, creating content for the internet, it kind of requires me to produce something fairly quickly, which is actually what I prefer. I like going straight in one day, get the pencils done, maybe ink in the same day. Sometimes I ink on a separate day if, it really is an in-depth piece. This is an area where my interest, synced up with what's best for running, like a channel or, TikTok. And that, in my opinion, would be, general cartooning because, time. Moving back to this piece, of course, I just finished what I would like to call the rough pencils of this drawing. You'll notice a couple things, that aren't super defined or, are misplaced, that I'll eventually connect, a lot of it is a little bit implied at this point. Another thing I haven't really added is my blackouts as well as, super direct lighting. But I do have all my forms defined. I could go right into inking this, but I'm just going to spend a little bit more time cleaning this up a little bit more, getting it as perfect as I like before I, move into ink. Guys, remember, ink is permanent. What you want to be doing while you're inking is really, putting the feel into the drawing. You don't really want to be thinking too much about the construction portion of it. And while you could go into inking straight off of the basic figures, actually, I'm terrified. I'm a coward. I'm scared. I'm not afraid to admit it. So I'm just going to be tightening this up a little bit more. And when I'm actually creating the lighting in this drawing, I want to think about the different textures, different elements I have in the drawing. Certain things like metal are going to react differently to direct lighting. Things like smoke, you might not even want to put lighting on it, maybe very subtle lighting on it. However, keeping in mind the different elements of your drawing is really going to help you with your composition and creating a great sense of contrast with your drawing. Maybe for part of the shadow that's actually like covered in the smoke, I'm going to fade it out, lighten it up a bit with some hatching instead of just blacking it out. Either way, you want to keep track of all of these graphical elements you have into the drawing. At this point, I'm pretty much 90% done with the drawing. Really what I just got to do is go out, ink it, make sure it's all defined. Obviously, if I were inking someone else's work, I'd probably want to put a little bit more time into defining the pencils because when you're transferring, art between multiple people, it's really hard to keep the creative vision of the original penciler if it's not on the page. So as you guys can see, I'm going to be using dip pens for this. Now, dip pens, I feel, produce the cleanest result. However, what you have to keep in mind is that there's a huge risk when you use these pens. It's sort of a risk to reward ratio. You could get very clean hatching. You could get very beautiful lines if you use these pens. However, you have to deal with two things that are pretty annoying. First is just going over your ink with your hand by accident, which will cause it to smudge, messing up your whole drawing. What I recommend to kind of mitigate this a little bit, you see I'm doing this a little bit in the drawing, is starting from, the top left corner if you're right-handed, top right if you're left-handed. And this will make it so you're kind of working away from that so you won't have to drag your hand over as much. And the second thing you have to worry about is just the pen like dipping or like a bead of ink coming off the pen. Now, I think this only happened once in the drawing, and what I did was kind of tap it up with some tissue paper. You could twist the tissue paper into a fine point and only touch the top of a bubble, and it will pull out a lot of that ink from the drawing if it's beaded up. And these pens definitely do take a lot more skill, a lot more, time goes into learning these tools. And when you become good enough, it essentially becomes like a G pen in a drawing software, except, you have this traditionally hard copy right in front of your face. Obviously, I'm probably going to scan this in for the final drawing. Now, I was unsure if you guys wanted to see like a little short form content on how I scan my artwork in. It's relatively simple, and what the nice part about scanning your artwork in is the fact that you could change the contrast so your blackouts are really black, as opposed to if you just like took a picture of it, maybe you don't have the correct software to, make it purely black and white, up the contrast, Also, it ensures the quality of the image. You could scan in much higher detail, and you could scan just the image without worrying about cropping out the background. So anyways, if you guys are interested in that, let me know down below. The video's kind of wrapping up right now, and before I show you the final piece, I just want to tell you guys to like and subscribe if you haven't. I appreciate it all, and guys, I want to try something new out. So, if you guys have any artist buddies, you could share this too. That really takes it to the extra mile. You know, I appreciate every single one of you supporting me, guys. We're about to hit 2K on TikTok. Maybe we'll get it today. We'll see. And with that, I'll be seeing you guys next Monday, 5 p.m. EST, on the greatest art channel in the universe, JDCart.